There's something being built right now in over 130 countries. The news hasn't covered it, but when it's finished, every transaction you make, every coffee, every rent payment, every transfer to a friend will be visibly logged, and in some cases controllable. This is called central bank digital currency. The most advanced version already has 2.5 billion users and none of them even opted into it. They live in China. So how is this going to affect you? Cash is anonymous and most people don't think about that until it's already gone. When you hand someone a $20 bill, nobody knows about it. There's no record of it, there's no trace of it, and there's no middleman telling you that you can or cannot spend that $20 bill. Governments have tolerated that for way too long, but it's quickly going to start changing. A central bank digital currency is a digital version of your country's money issued directly by the government. So it won't be your local bank or a payment app like PayPal, and because it runs on government infrastructure, every single transaction is visible to the people who built it. That sounds really invasive, and that's because it really is. Those people will have full oversight over what you're buying and what you're doing with your money day to day. And in some extreme cases, they can even restrict what you're buying or freeze your money. If that sounds made up, I want you to look at what China is doing and how their WeChat payment system works. If you jaywalk across the street, facial recognition software picks that up and it will find your profile. But let's not get too carried away on all of that stuff. So what actually is a central bank digital currency? Because people hear digital currency and they think, well, I already use digital money on my phone. I use it to send people money. I tap my card at the local grocery store. But that's not exactly what we're talking about. Right now, when you use your bank card, that's a commercial bank, and your bank is a middleman. There's a layer between you and the government, and that layer actually gives you some sort of protection. Your bank can't just decide one morning to freeze your account without going through a whole legal process. A central bank digital currency removes that layer entirely. Your money sits with the government, not with your bank account, with the government. And because it's programmable, because it runs on code, whoever controls that code can decide when it works, who it works for, and when it doesn't. There are 1.4 billion people on this planet who have no mobile phone or no bank account. There's no way to receive a payment digitally. There's no way to build credit. They can't access loans or savings products. They exist entirely outside of the formal financial system. And with a central bank digital currency, that would essentially change that because you can directly access everything, even with a mobile phone. You don't even need a bank account. In the Bahamas, after Hurricane Dorian, I think it's called, in 2019, a central bank digital currency called the sand dollar was used to distribute emergency aid and fund the people who actually lived on the island because their bank accounts weren't working, the ATMs were not working. So in the government's eyes, a central bank digital currency is actually good for that use case. But there's an entirely different story that they want to use it for, like cracking down on money laundering, illicit activities, terrorism financing, anything shady. And look, there are some quality of life improvements that come with it, but we already have the tools to do this with traditional finance and just more funding to the right things. We'd be in the same situation regardless of if we had a central bank digital currency or not. And if we look at things like in America, there's Congress members that are inside trading in plain daylight. So when a government tells me or you that a central bank digital currency is stopping financial crimes, I'm not really buying that narrative. Like, we already have so much corruption inside the country that it's not really making sense. So moving forward, we need to start talking about China because they're the furthest ahead in all of this central bank, all this digital currency stuff. Their central bank digital currency is called ECYN, or basically the digital yuan. By the end of 2025, the digital yuan had processed over $2.3 trillion worth of transactions and roughly had 2 billion active wallets, somewhere in that range. But the ECYN is programmable. The government can issue digital yuan that has an expiry date. You need to spend it by a certain date or it will just disappear. They've already done this. They've airdropped ECYN to citizens as like a stimulus check, and that basically prompts up the economy. It forces their citizens to spend in certain areas of the economy. They can also issue money restricted to certain categories, vouchers that can only work at specific stores, subsidies that can only be spent on approved goods. So there's like this weird area with their digital currency. And because every transaction is logged on government infrastructure, they can see where their citizens are spending that digital yuan. And if they don't like where their citizens are spending that, they can restrict it to only certain things. So you can only buy dog food, or you can only go to the grocery store, this one. You can't go spend your money here or there. And to a certain extent, it does make sense because America had stimulus checks during COVID, and look what all those people spent that money on. They were just buying random stuff. So China will tell you that this is about efficiency, about financial inclusion, about modernizing payments. Yeah, that might be true in some cases, but the same infrastructure that delivers subsidy vouchers is the same infrastructure that could one day decide that your money doesn't work where you want to be spending it. And the government doesn't need approval of what you can and cannot do. They can just do whatever they want. China isn't building a CBDC for its own citizens. It's building one for the world, a global payment infrastructure. Right now, the most consequential resource in global trade is oil, and majority of those transactions flow through the US dollar. That's the petrodollar system. It creates a structural, self-reinforcing demand for that dollar. And America is the center of global finance. They capitalize on all that trade. China sees that same framework and wants to replicate it, not through oil, but through digital payment infrastructure. And they're already leading the way right now. Their cross-border payment network called mBridge connects China, Thailand, UAE, Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia. The goal is straightforward. Create an international payment system that settles transactions completely outside of the US dollar infrastructure. They want to remove and escape that whole system that America has built. And right now, the dollar is the world reserve currency. Most international trade is settled in dollars, which gives the US enormous leverage. It can cut off countries from global financial systems through sanctions. Russia actually found this out after they had the whole invasion in Ukraine, and they did the same to Iran. Essentially, a Chinese CBDC network settling international payments in digital yuan is bypassing that whole dollar infrastructure entirely. It is a direct challenge to America, and that's why the United States has started paying attention to digital currencies and CBDCs, but there's weird laws going on in America. Not because of what the digital dollar would do for its own citizens, but because if China successfully becomes the infrastructure layer for global digital payments and 20, 30, 40 countries start using it for trade, the US essentially loses all of its power in geopolitical tools that make America so advanced. And a Federal Reserve governor literally called a US CBDC a solution in search of a problem. But allowing China to become the backbone of global payments is a far bigger problem than that. And then there's BRICS, a political coalition sitting behind all of this. Russia, China, Iran, and UAE. These countries, even Brazil, are motivated to find an exit from that digital dollar system, particularly after watching what happened to Russia when it was cut off from SWIFT. At their 2024 summit, BRICS members discussed building BRICS Bridge, essentially a version of mBridge scaled up. If that infrastructure gets built and countries like Russia and Iran plug into it, the US financial sanctions lose all of their power. So BRICS will provide the political will, and then China's CBDC infrastructure provides all the financial rails to that whole system. A central bank digital currency won't hit the same for certain countries. Like in places like Nigeria and Brazil, countries that have launched or are launching a CBDC this year, the whole pitch to financial inclusion, that's what they're aiming for. Millions of people getting access to financial systems for the first time. It sounds great, but the same infrastructure that gives someone their first bank account also gives governments a whole complete picture of every transaction that person will ever make moving forward. And then we have America. The US is doing something differently entirely. They passed a bill banning the digital dollar. Trump signed an executive order stopping all CBDC research. So there's kind of like a weird thing going on there. Instead, what Trump is doing is he's betting on private stablecoins, digital currencies pegged to the dollar, run by private companies rather than the government. So there's kind of like a loophole going on there. They don't want to be seen as a central bank digital currency because the people won't like hearing that. So after all of this, you might be wondering, what's actually better for us, having a central bank digital currency or not having one? The honest benefits are we'll get faster payments, lower costs, financial inclusion for people currently locked out of the system, better tools for catching money laundering and tax evasion, more direct tools for governments that are in crises. And then the other side of that is there's total transaction visibility, the end of financial privacy as we've ever known it, programmable restrictions on what you can spend your money on and when, the ability to freeze individual accounts without any third party, and almost incomprehensible amount of financial power handed to whoever controls that system. So if you don't like the current government, well, you're out of luck. Most governments will tell you the extreme version will never happen, that there will be privacy protections and there will be limits to what they can and cannot do. Maybe they mean that today, but once that infrastructure is built, it doesn't get less powerful over time. It gets more. A government that builds a complete real-time picture of every citizen's financial life, no future pressure will ever be able to resist using. That's just how that power works.